Why is attacking in this game so hard? Is it because you suck? Yes. Don't worry, if you watch enough of my videos, you too can get a champion. I don't have a champion charm. What am I talking about? You too can get a diamond 3 charm. Actually, you don't. It's the whole game has cheaters. There's no point. When people talk about how attacking sucks in Rainbow Six Siege, they might reference how a lot of strong attackers have been nerfed movement-wise. Sledge is a 3 armor, Thatcher's a 3 armor, Zofia is a 3 armor, and who else might be a 3 armor soon? This creates a frustrating discrepancy in terms of play styles where the only way to play on attack in a gunfight kind of way is to play a character that is going to be maligned as a gamer bro op, as a no-brain op like Ashe. Even though Ashe, all things considered, has a very good performance floor because she has a gadget that can be used for pretty much any kind of situation. You are always going to get usage out of Ashe's destructive gadget because you're always going to need to get rid of a bulletproof camera or some barbed wire or a shield. You're always going to be in a position where that might be necessary because the defenders are always going to have secondary gadgets regardless of whatever primary gadget that they bring. Comparatively, Zofia has a little bit better of a gadget in the sense that she has the stun grenades in addition to the impacts, but playing her just doesn't feel as fun because gunfighting is really clunky with her. Movement advantage is a really big deal in a game like this because it gives you better peeker's advantage, 1, and 2, it also just gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of your gunfighting. It feels snappier peeking in and out of cover. You feel like you have more control over your character. Regardless of how effective it is, I personally don't really see that much of an effective difference between a 3 armor and a 3 speed most of the time. Keyword most of the time in terms of gunfighting. But in terms of the player experience, playing a 3 armor is just not particularly fun in this game. They're loud and they're clunky to gunfight with. So why did Ubisoft feel the need to nerf Zofia in the first place, for instance? Well, mainly to make a differentiation between her and Ashe. There wasn't really much of a difference in terms of these two characters, aside from their 2-speed versus 3-speed armor rating. And in some instances, you could make an argument that 2 armor was a little bit better for Zofia because it allowed her to tank a couple of limb shots here and there and stay in the gunfight longer, stay around to push more engagements more often, as opposed to Ashe, who was a little bit more high risk, high reward. Now, that's not really the case. As I said, I think most people would agree that in 90% of circumstances, the 3 armor is the worst of the movement options. Again, the gunfighting is much more difficult to do, and you make a ton of noise, which is not irrelevant in this game, which makes it more difficult for you to clutch up sometimes in situations where you need to move and you can't conceal your movement. Rotations are not as difficult with the 3-speed as opposed to a 3 armor. Rotations can absolutely be gutted in a sense of you don't have enough time to make it all the way around the map to take a safer route, so that eliminates an option for you, which forces you to take a gunfight. Zofia had great guns. She had an Ashe 2.0 kind of gadget, and so there wasn't really anything that differentiated her from Ashe. The reason that she got nerfed, as far as I can tell, was to create, the whole pick rate dynamic where we don't want characters that are getting picked too much. And with entry fraggers, I think this question has been something that Ubisoft has dealt with for a really long time. People seem to have this idea that if you keep nerfing the gunfight aspects of the game, if you nerf things around gunfights, and the fact that people take gunfights, then all of a sudden they'll stop taking gunfights. And that's never happened, right? Gunners will play gunner ops. Whenever something gets nerfed, somebody else is going to play something else. This is what happened with Alibi to Warden. Mozzie was in that position. Ashe, Yana, Zof. There is a ranked gunner. There is a ranked rat who will play gun, especially in a solo queue environment. I don't know who's still solo queuing this game with the state the matchmaking is in, but if you're still solo queuing, good on you. I hear console's a little bit better. Maybe I'll get a PS5. Regardless, if you're solo queuing, you're probably going to be putting yourself in a position where you're not relying on your teammates as much. So a lot of that utility, right? A lot of the dynamics of, hey, I need this operator to do this thing with me while I'm also doing an operator thing is going to be a little bit more difficult to coordinate. So most people are just going to default to the gunning part. So nerfing the same gunner operator, right, again and again and again, in my opinion, is not going to be a particularly sustainable solution. And I'm not sure how much longer Ubisoft plans on doing it. I think they're finally cooling off. I think that in terms of the more recent speed changes, those have been the last. Those are probably going to be the last we'll see for a while. Because I can't really think of any operator in the game that really needs it. I don't think Grim needs it. Obviously, IQ doesn't need it, right? Which attacker must be a 3 armor right now for the sake of balance, to keep the game balanced? Which operator is just really, really OP because of their speed difference? Not really any at this point. So I don't think that's going to happen anymore. Sometimes Ubisoft will do the opposite of this. Sometimes they will give a character a speed difference to make more people pick them. Sens was a great example of this. Sens has frag grenades now, in addition to their 3-speed rating. Sens is a pretty decent gun. They gave the POF9 a lot less recoil. It has a really big magazine. You can entry frag pretty effectively with Sens. But nobody wants to play Sens. Why does no one want to play Sens? Because why would you play Sens when you can just play Ash? It's all about cost evaluation. People are going to take the path of least resistance 100% of the time. I don't think Sens has really gotten that much more play, even in the competitive circuit, because Sens is a really limited use case kind of gadget operator. There might be a particular kind of strat that you can pull off with the Sens if you plan it out ahead of time, but for the most part, Sens is really difficult to make work. You need a really good idea of what you're doing. You need good coordination from your teammates in order to pull off the execute. You have to have a really, really robust idea of the beginning, the middle, and the late stages of the round in terms of the side execute for the roly-poly to work. Again, most people are not super caught up on competitive shooter fundamentals. Most people just pick an operator, they get good results from them because they like their gun, and then they keep playing them. Not everybody's in Pro League, not everybody's champ. I don't think everybody should be expected to have champ level knowledge. I think everybody should be expected to be able to learn how to play, but I don't think everybody should be expected to be champ level. So regardless of the data that Ubisoft is looking at in terms of, wow, this operator gets picked more than this operator. And we think, based off of our spreadsheet, we think that there's some stuff here that isn't really, working out too great. And then they give Zofia a 3 armor rating. Again, this is one of those changes where I felt like, despite what Ubisoft was looking at on paper, I just didn't really understand what the point was at the time, because I realized that regardless of how much of a genius move you think that is, being able to explain that to people is going to be extremely difficult to do. It doesn't matter how you word it in what you release on your website. People are going to be upset because they had fun playing this character, and now that fun is gone. So if people want to continue playing the game, they're going to pick a different operator to play. Or they might just get mad, and then this is the final straw, I'm done. I don't know how many times people actually quit playing the game whenever their favorite character gets nerfed. I'm not really sure, what the data is on that. I'm not sure what you would call that bounce rate for a patch. I don't know how many people finally said, I've had enough when Sledge was turned into a 3 armor. Or when Thatcher was turned into a 3 armor. This is how I feel about speed and armor. I don't know if you can get away with it now. I feel like the cake has been in the oven for too long, and it might be a little difficult to do it now. But I honestly consider that making everybody a 2-speed 2 armor probably would have alleviated a lot of this grief a long time ago. I think if the game had shipped out that way, then you would have avoided a lot of this nonsense. There are a lot of variables in this game that get weighted and adjusted, and people get attached to the individual parameters that are set because it is a hero-based game. In a hero-based game, people are going to have an attachment to a particular kind of play style or a unique gameplay loop that is unique to that character. One of the things that I think Ubisoft has had trouble with is translating what they are looking at with their data to changes that the player base likes. I understand the methodology behind why a lot of attackers got changed into 3 armors and why that classic sort of siege entry fragger role isn't quite as stereotypical and MLG cracked as it used to be. I don't really think of it much as entry fragging, more as a first contact player, probably the better way to describe it, because a lot of the characters are slower, because a lot of the reactive gunplay is slower in this game. Those kinds of backstab maneuvers aren't as easy as they used to be, or at least you get punished for committing to something for a bit too long. The actual amount of time that you get on attack to come up with a decision feels like a little bit less, because if you don't commit to the bit, you're gonna suffer for it if you try to change your mind later. And some people think that's a good thing from a competitive shooter standpoint. I think that when we talk about the skill gap with the game, sometimes that has a hard time translating to the average person. Again, the average person does not understand why specifically playing this character is annoying. They just know that they're slow, and I don't like being slow. They feel the effects of not being able to rotate as efficiently. not being able to dart back and forth between cover as efficiently. All these things, right? Build up and then create a sort of malaise in the back of the mind when you play. And people don't like that. They might not necessarily attribute words to it. They might not be able to articulate it. But if you cover Rainbow Six Siege on a YouTube channel for a long enough time, eventually you will read every single comment pertaining to this game that you could ever possibly think of. And at a certain point you realize, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what the data says. This person was having fun, and now they're having less fun because of something that we did. I'm not saying that this is a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm sure that people had fun with pre-nerf Lion, right? There were a lot of people that were saying, just stand still, right? Keeping Lion in immediate post-outbreak release fashion and not adjusting him for a pretty significant amount of time, that was pretty rough. So in that sense, I don't think that obviously broken characters, outlier situations like Lion are directly comparable to situations like Zofia, Sledge, and a lot of the attackers that keep getting their speed changed. Aside from differentiating these entry fraggers, these gunner ops, from other characters, I'm kind of looking from the outside in, and I have a difficult time understanding why the changes, still have to be in effect. I'm not really sure that we got what we wanted out of adjusting Zofia or Sledge, or even Thatcher to a certain extent the way we did. I understood the argument for Osa because Osa plays a defensive angle holding style of Siege with the shields. And so in that sense, I kind of understood that. Like that actually, I think, helped her because she could take a hit to the arm or the leg sometimes if she needed to. But for everybody else who relies on their ability to get into gunfights relatively quickly, take advantage of Peeker's advantage, and get map control fast, I'm not really sure what the point was. I think there were many options that didn't necessarily involve reducing player enjoyment. I personally don't mind the change. I feel like I can still leverage Zofia quite a bit. Zofia is one of my favorite attackers to play right now. I really like her gun. I like having the stuns on top of the impact grenades. I like playing map control with her. I think that she's a very fun, aggressive character to play. I like just, getting in there with my gun up. I'm gonna take this. Let's fucking party. Let's go. I like that. But when I have to take a gunfight, right, with somebody who has a pretty entrenched fortified position and they're a 3-speed, suddenly the gunfight feels a lot more clunky on my end, even though my gun hits harder. One of the things that I've always kind of struggled to understand in terms of the attacker versus defender conversation is that the defensive positioning is not taken into consideration. It doesn't matter what gun the defender has when they have a positional advantage, because the difference between shooting someone in the face and not shooting someone in the face is 0 to 1. It is a binary. So when you go into an environment where you don't have information and you have to make an educated guess about where the opponent is, and you reveal your location with sound cues or other camera information, the defense, regardless of whether or not they have a pistol, is going to have the advantage. When I stopped looking at competitive shooters in the sense of who could shoot back better, it completely changed the way that I approach these games. Because these games aren't necessarily as much about mechanical skill as much as basketball is about shooting a ball through a hoop. A lot of those aim lab guys, the guys who farm aim labs, the argument that I often see leveled at them is that just doing a bunch of free throws over and over again isn't going to make you better at basketball. It's going to make you better at shooting a basketball into a hoop. And that's a perfect analogy. If all you do is work on your mechanics, but you don't understand what sets somebody up to put them in a better situation for a gunfight versus somebody else, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult to translate those concepts. One thing that I started doing a lot more recently is pre-fire stuff. Pre-firing stuff is just a thing that took, this long, I guess 10 years, to actually figure out, oh shit, yeah, I have a million bullets, and I understand and anticipate that this gunfight is going to come from this. I can hit a timing and then stop this guy from peeking me. Another fundamental that I figured out, 10 years down the line when I'm pushing 30. Peeking into your engagement is an advantage. If you know where somebody is, if you peek first, you're gonna have the jump on them because of peeker's advantage and the mental anticipation of it. Now, if the opponent has cover, that's a different thing altogether, but if you can isolate the gunfight, then peeking into them and just taking the gunfight right away is 100% gonna be the move. If you're on the defensive side of that, you have to get aggressive. You can't just sit there and wait in a corner, because the more aggressive player is going to clear every single aspect of the room geometrically, and then they're going to narrow you down, and then they're automatically going to win that gunfight. It doesn't matter how good your ability to click on things with a mouse is. You're always going to lose that gunfight. And one of the reasons that attackers in Rainbow Six Siege have assault rifles is supposedly to get around this lack of balance. Supposedly because they have more powerful guns, then statistically everything's just gonna, it'll all work out. And in practice, it doesn't really work out that way a lot of the time, because at the end of the day, the defense has the positional advantage. The positional advantage in the gunfight is arguably often more important than the actual firepower, as is true in Warfare. And I know that I throw the LARP card around a lot, but I feel like here in this example, right, not just, for the sake of looking cool on the internet, I think in this example, the LARP card is relatively apt, because in Warfare, a fortified position is always going to be better than the attacking position. That's been true for a long time. Fortifications mean that you can put out fire and sustain more damage from the outside. You have the advantage of reacting to what the opponent does. You don't have to do anything. Fundamentally, the only reason that the defense in Rainbow Six Siege goes out and roams is because they want to waste as much time as possible. In reality, in a situation, like Rainbow Six and what it depicts, you have all the time in the world. You have all the time in the world to plan where to put people, when to assign timings, when somebody's gonna go this way and somebody else is gonna go that way. In Rainbow Six, you don't have that. You have a set time limit, you have to get in the building, and you gotta do something. When you're going into a building, that usually means that you're trying to accomplish an objective. Again, the average player doesn't see this like a police raid. They see it as a video game. They see a character that they like, that has a gun that's fun to use, that's fun to take engagements with, and they're going to take the path of least resistance. In cases where operators like Zofia or Thatcher or Sledge get their speed adjusted again and again and again, I think that Ubisoft, a lot of the time, has this idea that what they're looking at on paper is how people are going to eventually interface with the game. That's true in some environments, but ultimately, it is a video game, and I think there needs to be a place for fun in addition to balancing. Not even necessarily for the sake of balancing, but just for the sake of player enjoyment, for health and trust with the community, for PR. And I'm not afraid to say that. I know a lot of people will lie through their teeth and say, oh yeah, there's a million other reasons, why we should do this, and never acknowledge that aspect of it. I have a degree in communication and new media. I understand PR to a certain extent. Not amazingly well. Sometimes I feel like I regret dropping out of the art program. Maybe I would have gotten more out of it, I'm not sure. But I think from a practical business point of view, it is important to increase player attention, and it is important to make sure that people are having fun with your game. Because if they're not having fun, the super amazing, super awesome competitive game that you're balancing, and all of its perfect balance, and all of its amazing balance in your spreadsheet in the world, none of that's really gonna matter if nobody wants to play it. You can give them this really balanced thing and say, look how balanced it is. But if people don't want to play it, it doesn't matter. And when I think people say, oh, Ubisoft, they hate us. They hate us casuals. They hate the casual proletariat. The pro league bourgeois has stamped on us for too long. I think what they really mean is Ubisoft seems to favor balance over fun. And a lot of people don't give a crap if a game is balanced. They just want the game to be fun. In some senses, my comparison I'm about to make is an apples to oranges comparison, but not for the things that I think people would get pissy about in the comments. Modern Warfare 2, for example, was not a balanced game, but it was really fun. Now, that game is not Rainbow Six Siege. It's not a competitive shooter, right? It was an arcade shooter. People tried to make it into a competitive shooter with COD League and stuff like that. Call of Duty is, that's a difficult one to break down because professional COD, especially during the Xbox 360 era, was pretty fucking big, and it did a lot for the industry. But did the average person care back then? No, right? That was mainly on the internet. That was mainly YouTube. If you were in that kind of like shooter bro space, then you knew about it. If you weren't in that shooter bro space, you didn't care. Nobody gave a shit about MLG unless you were really into gaming like that. In fact, I remember for the most part, people got made fun of, right? People were like, getting paid money to play video games is lame. You're a loser. And I know Chud Jacks will hear that and they'll be like, we should return to that. We won't. Sorry. My face when time passes. I'm personally okay with esports stuff being a little bit more mainstream now versus when it used to be. I've said my piece on Rainbow Six Siege's balancing approach multiple times. The game was dead in 2015. Nobody gave a shit about this game. If it weren't for the competitive scene, it would have been dead. But people don't know that. And more importantly, I don't think people should have to know that. That's only something that I think you know if you're really plugged into the scene. Or if you watch my videos and I talk about it. You can't force people to understand. You can't make people understand why your balancing approach is so awesome and smart. You just gotta meet people where they are. And a lot of people, in terms of the balancing, regardless of how awesome it is on paper, don't feel like the game is being balanced for them. I'm not saying that all these people have the same level of critique. I'm not saying that everybody is approaching in good faith. A lot of people are just mad that their favorite character got nerfed, and this is finally their reason to, you know, complain on Twitter or something. But I think there is a valid point for fun, especially for attackers right now, that should be looked at. And I'm not sure what the solution is yet, but the cheater thing has to get figured out first, or, you know, a lot of this conversation is kind of irrelevant. What do you think of the way Ubisoft has been balancing attackers in Rainbow Six Siege lately? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Deuces.